get started
About
here.
that time. You need a bell to ring.
Yeah. That's all right. We'll get on. Okay, 7 o'clock, time to get started. There's a signing sheet going around. Please be sure that you get that signed in. And welcome to the August 2026 meeting of the Houston County Historical Society. Thank you all for coming. If Mr. Black would lead us in the pledge to the flag, please.
Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We are a republic.
Yes, we are.
People forget that.
If you don't mind, just silence your phones or put it on vibrate, so we won't have that
Right in the
interruption.
middle of it.
Meeting minutes. Did everybody get their meeting minutes? I have minutes from May. We met with Stewart County in June, and then in July, we were allowed to visit the areas that were having the celebration of the 250th birthday. So we have minutes and we have information from the June 23rd meeting at Dover. Very good meeting. And I don't know if any of you have read the book or not, but I hear it's very good. Okay, it's good. So the minutes, did everybody get their minutes? Is there a question or a comment or deletion, addition? If there are no corrections to be made at this time, we will deem the minutes approved. Treasurer's report, Ms. Leah.
For May, June, and July, we had $200 in income. We had almost $325 in expenses. As Melissa will share, we bought a couple things from the Ben Hagler estate. And we also received some interest on our CDs. Our big $10,000 CD rolled over at a 3.25% for another 12 months. In all of our accounts, we have $16,948.43 on July 31st. So we're doing very well.
Okay, is there a motion to approve the minute?
So
The
moved.
treasurer's report? Is there a
I'll
second?
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Membership dues, we go over this each time, but if you'd like to go ahead and pay your dues for the next year, this year, they are $10 per household per year or $50 per household for a lifetime membership. Melissa, do you have a archives update?
It's been a while since we've met, so several things have happened, so I'm glad to talk to you about them. As Leah alluded to, Ben Hagler's estate is being settled, and his nephew has come to see me many times, and they've had an estate sale, and they've sold some things. So what we were able to obtain from the estate, many of you know Ben Hagler was very much into history, and so I was very pleased that the estate reached out to the archives. We were able to pay for, out of our archives fund, the Hagler service station ledgers, which are over there. This is the service station that they just tore down. They're going to build a pharmacy. And so they kind of came in an opportune time. At the same time they were tearing it down, we were getting the ledgers. There is a painting, an original painting by Miss Lucille Vinson of the Aaron Depot that had belonged to Ben Hagler. Interestingly enough, I had reached out because I had seen them post some things on Facebook that they were selling in the estate, and I said I was interested in this particular painting. And they said, oh, someone's already coming to pick it up. And I said, okay. Well, they told whoever that was that the archives was interested in it, and the person paid for it and then donated it to us anonymously. So we don't know. So if any of you are here that you did it, thank you very much. The other thing that we got from that estate, some of you may or may not have ever heard of a person named Otho Robinson. Otho Robinson was in World War I. He is not necessarily a Houston County native, but at the time of his death, he was living in Houston County, and he was I believe the great uncle we figured out of Ben Hagler. He had done some major research, but the documents that we got are original documents. And any of you that have done military research knows that when you contact the National Archives in St. Louis, they usually send you that form letter, especially at that particular time, telling you that there was a fire in 1973 and that the records had been destroyed. So when I saw these original records, I thought we have to have them. So we were able to get those. Again, anonymous donors donated $175 for those records, and then we were able to get them without having to spend a dime for them. These anonymous people out there. I actually was able to obtain a letter off of eBay. Many of you know, I don't necessarily scour eBay, but I have eBay send me notifications of things that I've set up to look for. This is actually a letter that is undated, but we think it dates from anywhere. Looking at the paper, it's that blue, old blue paper, and the handwriting, it dates between 1850 and the 1880s. And it is written to someone in Danville, Tennessee. I have not been able to transcribe the entire letter. But anyway, we believe that one of the people's names on there is Myra Smart, S-M-A-R-T-T. That's not a name really from around here, but we were able to get that letter. Lastly, I've been working with a gentleman named Jason Doherty. He has family that is in the Lyle Cemetery out on Ellis Mills. And he has been working very hard. I actually heard from him today. He called me. And he was able to get the Lyle Cemetery on the Tennessee Historic Cemetery Register. It is number 127 in the state, which means it's the 127th cemetery that is on this historic register. He sent me the application that he turned in, which has a lot of family information and other information in it, if you're welcome to look at that. He says he's interested in trying to get other Houston County cemeteries on the historical register. I'm surprised there's only 127 in the whole state of Tennessee, but I'm sure there's a lot more cemeteries that could have it, but it just takes the time. When you see his application, it's about 9 pages long. So it takes people having to do the work. Other than that, several of you have asked me about the update on the armory and when we're going to move. Last I heard, they're going to start refurbishments on September 1st. Hopefully we'll be moving maybe February or March. I'm looking forward to the move because of the space, but I'm not looking forward to the move because of the move. But it's going to be good, really, really good in the end. And like I said, some people have said that they have to donate things, but they want to wait till we get up there. Please go ahead and donate them. One of my big fears is that, some of you may not be here and then your kids are going to chuck it in the garbage. So, that's the only way we are able to save things, is the history, especially photographs and documents and scrapbooks, because that has really the best history. And so I'll also tell you, some of you who are not on Facebook and who may not have seen this, we had a fantastic, I call it a discovery. There is a Facebook page called the Louisville and Nashville Railroad Historic something. And over a couple of weekends ago, Keith Greer, who is our maintenance man at the courthouse, he's also into history, sent me a picture that had been posted on that Facebook page. It was a picture, never before seen, we didn't have it, picture of the Central Hotel, of a side that we don't have. So we were very, very grateful. It was dated 1917. And the history, I've been researching the history of that hotel. That hotel stood for about 100 years. We have roughly between 8 to 10 photographs of the outside. We have not one photograph of the inside of that hotel. So there has to be photographs of the inside of the hotel in someone's closet, in someone's attic, someone's basement. So I encourage you to search in your photographs and look in the background. If you see something that looks like a hotel, let me know. So that's all I got. Thanks.
I have a question. I have a question and a comment. Where is the Lyle Cemetery located in Ellis Mills? Is
But
it the one on
y'all know where
West?
the Cracker Box used to be on 149?
You're going back pretty far
Going
there,
back
Scott.
right before you cross the bridge. It's back up on that hill,
Behind the Cracker Box?
behind the Cracker Box.
13.
13, yeah, 13.
Thirteen.
On 13. You fall off in the straight stretch and you go across the bridge. It's right back up to the right.
So it's considered Ellis Mills?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
The other comment I had was Otho Robinson
Mhm.
married a lady named Georgia Reynolds.
Reynolds, yes.
Yeah.
Now, I have not done any, or a lot of research on that, but the funny thing is, they had a child named Arthur Reynolds Robinson. If that means anything to any of you that went to school around here, I haven't got the connection, but I thought that was very odd.
And that's how Ben Hagler connects us through the Reynolds,
Yes, was through the mother.
the mother. Yeah, pretty sure it's the mother, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the mother. No, it was Arthur Robinson's wife was Georgia, you said, was Georgia
Yes,
Reynolds.
Yes.
Yes, his
And-
wife was Georgia
Yes.
Reynolds.
It's not that far off from you guys.
She looked it up, I can't remember.
I've got
what she
it.
found,
I can't
yeah.
remember now.
You did find it, but they had a son named Arthur
Reynolds.
Robinson.
That's funny.
But the documentation you're going to see over there is actual documentation where he was made captain, where he was made general, and he ended up being a colonel. So his obituary is over there, you can read that as well. And he and his wife were living here in Erin when he passed. I don't know how long they lived here. They're not native to here, I don't think. But I just, the records when you see them are just wonderful, so we had to have them. So, any other questions? All right.
Okay, we'll move along then to the new business. I hope you all got to attend some of the Memorial Day programs that we have here in the county. And for 2027 program, we are working on the program for 2027. If you have a program you would like to build, please let us know. Donald and Jackie have worked diligently on trying to get this going. I think it's April of 2027 at Griffin's Chapel.
April 17th.
April 17th, 2027, Griffin's Chapel. And they will recognize Korea, Vietnam.
We're going to recognize every veteran from the end of World War II, like December of 45 through May of 75, the end of Vietnam.
Okay. But if you have any pictures of a veteran or anything else, we would love to have those in our file. I mean, there's probably people here, if they were born here, if they lived here, if they died here, they are a veteran. So we'd like to get that going on. Let's see. There's the minutes. Any old business anybody would like to discuss? I guess that's old business and new business, both of them, three and more. And those, let's see. For our upcoming meeting, I don't want to jump too much ahead, but we have a speaker. The title of his program is Birth of the Tennessee Rangers and the Black Patch Tobacco War. It's by John W. Elliott. That's for our program in September the 8th, our next program. He is the grandson of Eli A. Tucker, a ranger, and the nephew of A.C. Tucker, a district ranger. So I have the information on him if you would like to see that for our next program. And I guess it's time to introduce our speaker, Mr. Ronnie Tumelson. Did I pronounce that right? He was born in Kentucky but never lived there. He went directly to Stewart County and has been a serial resident ever since. His most recent stint began in 2015. He earned his BA from the University of California, Santa Cruz, and his PhD from the University of Alabama. His scholarly publications have appeared in journals and books published by Cambridge University Press, Oxford University Press, and Rutledge. The seed for the Tennessee charcoal iron and introduction to the Ironworks of Stewart County was planted in 2019 when he presented a case to the Stewart County High School students enrolled in a criminal justice course. It was published in July 2025. His next book will be on the 1856 slave insurrection panic in Stewart County. Mr. Thomas.
Thank you. Yeah, someone commented about the black hat because I like to think of myself as a bit of the villain of the piece as I approach this material, and perhaps you'll see why when we get through some of this. I do have some thanks, of course, for Donald and Jackie Bateman for inviting me, for Sam and Judy Fassell, for Melissa Barker, for Leah for providing the computer to compensate for the one that I brought that wasn't cooperating, and Jim Long as well, because so much of what I was able to do in working on this book is in large part thanks to some of the things that Jim Long had already collected. And of course, thank you all for coming out to see this presentation. It's, for the most part, some of my trials and tribulations in writing Tennessee Charcoal Iron as an introduction. Originally, perhaps if you recall, it was going to be titled something else when I spoke here in 2024. But I wanted to start off with, and this is one of those quirky things, like I said, I work in Mac, and I zipped right through this one. Sometimes when you switch over from Mac to PC, it reformats things. It thinks there's a better way to format things. So that should be George Houston Bateman on one line. And this is what he says in an essay from the 1980s. I never saw a furnace in operation. What I know about it is what other people have told me and what I have read. And that's true of me as well. So I thought I would honor him in citing him as a kind of epigraph to this talk. So if you recall, back in 2024, I was titling this A Guide to the Ironworks, and it was supposedly coming soon. Technically, I suppose it came eventually, and I retitled it to reflect, I think, better of what this is. It's more of an introduction or a reintroduction, because so much of what I was discovering seemed to be different from the things I had found before. So just to take you back just briefly, so in 2018, I was actually doing some scholarly work for a journal published by Oxford called Notes and Queries, and I was responding to an earlier scholar's work who had called attention to the faulty lines of scholarly communication, and he said that this work that had been written by Robert Greene or attributed to Robert Greene has never been included among the lists of Greene's works. And I knew automatically that he was wrong because I'd found it in the list of Greene's works. In this text here from the 18th century, and I also found it here, 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 and in two other places. So if your definition of the word never, includes maybe a dozen or so examples, then you might not be using the word never correctly. And we'll stop here. This is 1861. So this is a Civil War, so I realize this is still a little bit of a touchy subject. So in any case, that's what I was doing in 2018. In 2019, I was doing a presentation in Stewart County for the high school students on a doctor who had been accused of murdering his wife. And there was a reference to him as being the postmaster of Stromboli Furnace. So I started asking, beginning with my mother, where was Stromboli Furnace? And she said,
I've never heard of it.
I've never heard of it. So she said, ask Ski. So those of you who know Ski, I asked Ski, I said, Ski, where was Stromboli Furnace? And Ski said, never heard of it. So I thought, all right, I'll see if I can't find Stromboli Furnace. By June and July of 2019, I put together a sort of 4-page draft that I shared with Ski and Kim Schmidt, who does a lot of the cemeteries in Stewart County and probably across the county line as well. Shared that with them. This is, of course, the final draft with some of my revisions. So yes, I do this to my own work and others too. So that's 2019. In 2019 also, if you recall, Wood was talking to you in June of 2019 about the archaeological discoveries that they had made at Brunsoni Furnace. And so there's a newspaper article there for that Joint Historical Society meeting. I wasn't the first person to ask the question, where was Stromboli Furnace? it turns out. I didn't know this at the time. But Charles Lovelady had asked this question to my grandmother, Destine Martin, before she died in 1985. So as he points out here, the late Destine Martin, this is in the third line, the last Stewart County historian, when I asked her about it, knew nothing of its location, builders, or owners. And all he had were postal records, and that's exactly where I started, was with postal records. I knew that there were postal records referring to it, but apparently there was no reference otherwise to Stromboli furnace. I found this probably in 2023, 2024, so it was long after I'd already worked through most of Stromboli furnace. So that's what it looks like in the book, the entry for Stromboli furnace. I condensed those 4 pages just down to 1. The idea behind the book, as an introduction, was to take some of the other things that had been published, such as the book on the left, dedicated to my grandmother back in 1986 when it was published. I've got a copy of it on display over there that you can see, and just there are other things that Melissa has brought for display as well. For my stuff, feel free to pick up things, with the exception maybe of that piece of iron because it's heavy, but you're welcome to look at it in close detail. Another book that served as a model was the Tennessee Iron Furnace Trail. This was published in 2006, and it was nice because it went through and gave basically 1 page to each of the ironworks that it wanted to introduce or reintroduce people to. So theirs is on the left for Bellwood Furnace, mine is on the right. So I devoted far more words and far less emphasis on illustrations. And I also wanted to make sure that I got the details correct for things. One of the things that's mentioned here about Bellwood Furnace has to do with the John Bell house. It is the house that is adjacent to the furnace north of the stack there. The picture that's up on the top left-hand side, if you go north to the left, you'll see that house, but that is not the John Bell house. That is probably the manager's house. John Bell's house was on the other side of the Cumberland River, and we have 4 good illustrations, or good photographs of that house from the 1890s up to about 1910, 1909. So we have a pretty good idea as to where that was, and it's not the house that's over there across the river in Bellwood. So the journey itself began for me with that first question, where was Stromboli furnace? 2020, of course, if you remember COVID, I was working up in Land Between the Lakes, and because we had shut down, it suddenly dawned on me that I could probably work on, after having worked on the Stromboli furnace problem, I could probably work on trying to get other things sorted out because there was so much misinformation that was out there. And so some of it was child's play by the time I got to the publication for this Tennessee magazine. This was, of course, history for kids, but I could figure this out pretty easily. So who was Thomas Yateman? Well, I knew that he died in 1833 by this point, and I knew that he could not have built Bear Spring Furnace in 1872 or 1873 because he died on a boat, and that was built on land 40 years after his death, more importantly. So that, like I said, that was some child's play stuff there, that this was somewhat problematic. But again, kids are resilient, they'll learn their mistakes and move on. Other things were a little bit more problematic. This is actually an example of academic misconduct. It involves plagiarism, as you can see there. If you read the bottom, red underlining, I'll read the top. During its history, the Cumberland Ironworks was composed of different combinations of partners who were involved with several different iron production sites. So that sentence is verbatim in the repeated source from the original. Other problems that kind of struck me along the way, this is from USDA Forest Service, from Land Between the Lakes. This had been online for a while, but then they've taken it down, perhaps all of these pages that they had up there for their ironworks. And what caught my eye, there are several things that are problematic, but what caught my eye is the last sentence. According to legend, the furnace was named after a racehorse named Peytona. In the course of doing research, I found quite a bit of good information. It was named after a racehorse named Peytona, and so it's not legend. Thomas Kirkman, so the bottom rectangle in red, I've blown up here to put at the top. Thomas Kirkman of Alabama, who entered his champion mare Peytona. He is the one who built Peytona Furnace on the headwaters of Bear Creek. So we can move beyond legend and actually get into history, because those are fundamentally different things. So this was good history, right? Finding this sort of thing. Other sorts of things were challenging as well. So this is the Tennessee Historical Commission's marker for Bear Spring Furnace, indicating that it discontinued in 1901. There are others that say that it ceased in 1907 and 1908, or off and on through the 1920s, or 1921, or 1928. I'm an English major, so you can imagine how these numbers would be confusing to me, right? As I was trying to wade my way through this stuff, but I figured, how hard could it be? One of those two has got to be correct, right? It's got to be one of those two. It can't be all of them, but it's got to be one of those. More than two, obviously. Other sources that I looked at in the process, of course, would be something that may be familiar to many of you, The History of Stewart County, Tennessee by Iris Hopkins McLean. She is pictured here regarding me with a high dose of skepticism. And what she said about Dover Furnace, Dover number 2, the records between it and Dover Furnace are most confusing, and I completely agreed with her about this. Because in the process of doing some of the research, like with Stephen Ash's book, it has two images. There's Dover Furnace up on top, and then there was Dover Furnace at Carlisle. So presumably there was one at Carlisle and another Dover Furnace someplace else. This is the lower image, kind of blown up to see it a little bit better quality, a little bit better detail. And this is the other image with a little bit better quality, a little bit better detail. Pay attention to the man in the white shirt and hat. He would be my polar opposite, I suppose. He's the white-collar laborer there. So, a newspaper article from 1939 identified this as the Dover, a coal blast furnace at Bear Spring. So we've got now one in Carlisle and one in Bear Spring, right? Called Dover Furnace. But there was a problem, because the one that was also called Dover Furnace in Bear Spring, in some of the TVA materials, was identified as Bear Spring Furnace. So that became problematic. Keep in mind, we're still paying attention to the man in the white shirt. It was also called the old Carlisle Furnace in operation. So now it's the Dover Furnace, potentially in Bear Spring, the Carlisle Furnace, and Bear Spring Furnace itself, all the same image. And you can tell by the middle one there, right? By the time this photograph was taken, right? It's like, okay, I gotta sort through this stuff. But another problem was that this was also being called the Carlisle Furnace by the time this photograph was taken, right? So it's actually the same caption there, but they're clearly, if I go back, they're clearly different structures, different photographs taken in different places. So it became a bit of a problem. But I knew something that they didn't know. And I had a bit of a testy exchange one day with Ski in the library, because she said, how do you know that that's Bear Spring Furnace? And I said, because I can see the bear. If you blow up that little image there, and if you want to see a little bit a better image, a modern image, I can see the bear. So that pretty much settles that. So we know that that's Bear Spring Furnace, right? We're back on solid ground like we are with the horse Peytona and Thomas Kirkman owning that horse. So that's Bear Spring Furnace. You may recall this image that shows the train in Bear Spring, the plume of smoke coming from the locomotive, the flat cars, the men loading the pig iron onto the flat cars, and the white-collar laborers, presumably of White Dixon and Company, on the far right-hand side on the other flat car. So that's kind of what I knew, is that has got to be Bear Spring. So this is not Dover at Bear Spring. It has got to be something else. And this is clearly not the old Carlisle Furnace. So I also had to come up in my mind with some way to kind of categorize the things that I was looking at, and I invented a term that I think kind of captures exactly what I was looking at and how to maneuver things and push them out of the way. So I decided to come up with fake news. I don't think anyone else has ever used this term before. So this newspaper article from 1986 that identified that, and you can still see the bear, by the way. The bear is right there. But this is fake news. That photograph was not taken of the old Carlisle furnace. In fact, I might as well come clean. You won't find an entry in here for Carlisle furnace because I've never found any evidence that it existed. You'll see newspaper articles in the sort referring to it, but it was the Dover furnace. So part of the confusion that Iris Hopkins McLean had was the original Dover furnace in the late 1820s was replaced by Dover number 2 in 1854, and the source at the time tells us new furnace, old site, so you know it's a new furnace in the place that a previous furnace had been built. Then after the Civil War, when they started up again with a new Woods Yateman and Company, they dropped the number 2 and just called it Dover furnace, and they ran that until the mid 1870s when they had a financial collapse and Woods Yateman and Company shut down. Then that furnace stood idle until the turn of the century. So by about 1903, it's operational again. And so this, also this image for Bear Spring Furnace, I knew that this was incorrect because if you trace back the original, the earliest possible image that you can get to comes from about 1906. There's a copy of this brochure in Stewart County Historical Society, and they label it as Dover Furnace. So this is kind of a slam dunk. Other things that kind of match up as well is that I can figure out the orientation. There are a couple of maps, including an insurance map, that allow us to kind of line up all the images here to say, okay, I have a pretty good idea where this photograph was taken. It's about 100 yards away from the railroad, modern day 49. So we're on pretty firm ground with the identification of that. This one, I'm fairly convinced isn't a blast furnace at all, even though it had been called Dover Furnace at Carlisle, because there are no chimneys, there are far too many structures, too many different aspects of the building itself, of the whole complex, and without any chimneys, this thing would burn to the ground, because there's no place for the heat to escape from the structure. It may be the spoke factory in Carlisle that was built. Jim Long, several years ago, suggested there's always the possibility that it may not even be from Stewart County, it may be from some other place. But at any rate, so that's enough about Stewart County. We can shift our attention to mainly Houston County. Remember, and I do point this out in the book, that when these furnaces were operational, Houston County did not yet exist. So there is that kind of shared history, but it's also kind of an independent history for Stewart County when it was part of Stewart County, but it's also part of your history as well for Houston County. There's a bit of a joke here in the title, we'll come to that in a minute, but you'll likely recognize this from the commemorative marker that's in the visitor center for Stewart County. Just to call attention to props, the frame, the wooden frame here, my dad actually built that. He's here sitting over here. It's modeled on the frame that had been out beside the courthouse. It originally sat, this commemorative marker, in front of the old courthouse in the town square, and then when the new courthouse was built in the 1960s, it was moved and sat outside my grandmother's library when she was Stewart County librarian. Technically, I guess that makes it the county's library, not hers, right? Just for clarification's sake, in case there are legal problems later. Erected by the Tennessee Historical Commission as well as Stewart County Court and interested citizens of Stewart County. Now, you'll probably, if you're familiar with this, how many of you have been up to see this before or have seen it before? A couple of you. If you're from Houston County, you're likely going to feel slighted by this representation, because the only site that's on here that's actually attributed to Houston County is way over there on the eastern side of the county itself. We'll come back to this in a minute, but that's the only ironworks that they're willing to give you, those interested parties in Stewart County. They might still feel bitter over the border, the county line there. If you remember, Jim Long talked about some of those disputes from 1871 forward. But in any case, that's kind of how they treated this. So this is, remember, keep in mind that this is Stewart County historians writing this. And some of the problems, of course, that crop up here, and there are numerous problems, are something like this. Cumberland City, now Bowling Green. It's the other way around, right? So there are things like that on this marker that you have to pay attention to. And because I'll be talking about Ashland to Wilcox, like I said, there's a bit of a joke in the title here. It sounds like I'm going from almost A to Z, going from A to W or A to X if you go to the end of the word Wilcox. And since there's nothing in between, it makes my task all the easier, right? So I'm going to go from Ashland to Wilcox. I am, of course, kidding. I do want to move over to the other side and talk a little bit about Eclipse furnace. And if we zoom in on this section, so the Tennessee River's over to our left. We've got LaGrange furnace here, the north fork of Leatherwood Creek, moving in that direction, moving east. And then the east fork of Leatherwood Creek, and that's where they've decided to put Eclipse down there, clearly fully within the range of Stewart County as far as they're concerned. So again, back to Iris Hopkins McLean, she said that this furnace was located on Hurricane. You say hurricane or hurricane? Hurricane. Hurricane. I was told to say hurricane. So Hurricane Creek south of Dover, east of Stribling. And then the last sentence, the location on Leatherwood Creek is believed by residents of Stewart County to be the proper location for Eclipse furnace. Well, we already know what Stewart County historians believe, right? And the residents, they believe that Cumberland City is now Bowling Green, right? So we can kind of dispense with that as best we possibly can. But about the same time that Ash's book was published, there was a newspaper article that came out by Nelda Saunders. And I don't know, we'll redact a lot of this. So she says, she was diplomatic. I think we have to give that to her. She was completely diplomatic. Because when you have different claims, competing claims about where it was, Eclipse furnace built 1833 on Hurricane Creek. Eclipse built 1833 near Leatherwood. Problem solved. Nothing problematic about that at all, right? Now, remember, this is 1833, so 1871 is way off in the distance. So now we have two furnaces, both named Eclipse, both built in 1833, one in one place and one in the other. That's not going to create any confusion for anyone, right? So, of course, it's going to create some confusion. So if we go back to the commemorative marker, this is the entry there. They are numbered, but it's also alphabetical, so that's why it's number 12. So Eclipse furnace, built 1833, that's probably where the 1833 came from. And other information about it, about its the width of the Bosch, the height of the stack, and that it operated until about 1885. The date 1833 is deeply problematic because James Safford, he's the state geologist. In 1855, he delivers his report to the General Assembly, and it's published in the following year, and he tells us that Eclipse is a new furnace. It had been operational in 1854. That's the only full year for which Safford had dates and information, and 641 is the total number of tonnage of iron that Eclipse was making in the 4 months that it operated that year. So it was a new furnace about 1855, so 1833 begins to sound somewhat problematic. And another source in the 1850s as well, this is Junior Peter Leslie, J.P. Leslie, in the Iron Manufacturer's Guide, and again there's one of those formatting issues, apologize for that. Hurricane Creek, so he's at least nailed that down for us. And most of the other details, as you can see up there, Cobb Phillips and Company, Cobb Phillips and Company, so Cobb Phillips up there, Cobb Phillips down here, and the Bosch and the height of the stack, those things all come directly out of Leslie, or at least they come kind of distilled through other sources, but they ultimately come from Leslie's publication. His brother was in the area in the spring of 1858 collecting the data and then mailing letters back to his brother in Philadelphia. And so that's what it ends up getting published in 1859 for the Manufacturer's Guide. And this last claim here operated until about 1885 for Eclipse furnace. This has got to be incorrect because we do have at least a published letter from the president who owned LaGrange Ironworks after the Civil War. He had bought it from Cobb for the survivors of Cobb, Phillips and Company who had owned it before the Civil War. So it's Stewart County, LaGrange, Clark, and Eclipse. They had all been collectively owned, and now they are also collectively owned by Garrett and his partners. And we're told here at the bottom, Eclipse furnace, no machinery there. It was destroyed during the war and has never been refitted. Again, it may depend on what your definition of the word never is. But I'm going to go ahead and trust the owner of the properties and take his word at face value that they never repaired any of the machinery, never did anything with the machinery. So the claim that it operated until about 1885 has got to be incorrect. So some of this is the kind of process here of what I was going through to kind of nail things down. If you hadn't seen it before, this is a blown up image of Eclipse from that letterhead from the 1870s. And it looks like it's functioning. You got smoke coming out of the chimney, etc. You got either a horse or mules, moving materials. But this is just a stylized vignette, right? Just to kind of represent what this thing might have looked like when it was in fact operational on Hurricane Creek, right? Let's just make sure we got that clear. So it's on Hurricane Creek, it's not on Leatherwood. There weren't two of them, there's just one. Sometimes in some of the histories, and I won't mention any names, but sometimes you'll see it referred to maybe as Clips furnace. And I think that that's just an elision of the E at the beginning, like saying the Eclipse furnace, the Clips furnace, right? So you just kind of take those two E's at the end of the word the in the beginning, the next E. Shakespeare did this all the time, right? It's called elision. So if you ever see the Clips furnace, that's probably what they're referring to as this furnace here. Especially if they put it on Hurricane Creek, then you're in the right place. All right, so let's come back to Ashland to Wilcox, since we did take a little bit of a detour. So like I said, we're only going to cover that territory. I want you to notice something about this. If you pay close attention to this commemorative marker, you'll perhaps come to the realization that Wilcox doesn't have a number assigned to it. Ashland is number 1 because the list is alphabetical, so 1 starts with A, and Bear Spring, and so on and so forth, Byron Forge. So you can see up above for Hollister, up here you've got a 14, you've got a 6, a 5, a 4, and a 22 for Union. Union, of course, should be down on Lick Skillet Branch, so it is also in the wrong place. But Wilcox doesn't have a number, and that should be somewhat intriguing to you. It also doesn't have an entry down below on this commemorative marker in the Visitor Center by the interested citizens of Stewart County. They stopped with Valley Forge, which wasn't in Stewart County anyway. It was over in Montgomery County. But there's no W there for Wilcox, even though there is clearly a Wilcox furnace and a date as well, but beyond that, they've got absolutely nothing. Partly, perhaps, that commemorative marker was put on the old courthouse lawn by 1957. There's a newspaper article that tells us that. And so this is 1965, right? So a few years later. One of the things that she says toward the back of the book is that she never really knew that the marker was there. She came across it kind of accidentally, which she had been relying on previously. We'll come to in a minute. But this is what she says: Wilcox, 3 miles south of Carlisle, no further information. Because what does anybody know about this? This furnace for Ashland, now Houston County, located 8 miles southeast of Bowling Green, now Cumberland City. It sure sounds like she read that commemorative marker, but she's clearly got this correct, right? It's now Cumberland City, not the other way around. And then the Houston County writers locate this furnace about 3 miles northeast of Erin, and that's a little bit problematic too, because if you go northeast of Erin, you're going to go back towards Cumberland City, right? If you're headed in that direction. So that's one thing that we'll look at. This again is Nelda Saunders, 1985-86. Ashland, built 1851 near Erin. Wilcox furnace located south of Carlisle. So that's how she describes this. So there's a fundamental problem here that I had to work through and sort out. So the question, and then of course, is what happened? And how did it happen, I guess? What happened was this book was published by this man, Ernest Burchard. He was with the U.S. Geological Survey. He originally visited in spring of 1923 to Stewart-Houston County and all the areas in the Western Highland Rim. He's pictured here as a young bureaucratic regarding all of us, I think, with a bit of disdain, if I can interpret his facial expression. But this is what he said about Ashland. 8 miles southeast of Bowling Green, built with the dressed stones of the Van Buren stack, et cetera, et cetera. We've seen this before. And his source is Junior Peter Leslie from 1859, page 133. So we're pretty good on this stuff. So, Ashland, 8 miles southeast of Bowling Green. If we drop the Merrill Ruger map, this very, very good map from 1865, you were here at Erin Station, just to give you kind of a location here. Cumberland City is right here, so let's drop a compass around Cumberland City, and then let's draw a line 8 miles southeast of Bowling Green, and that puts us in Dixon County, right? If we trust, so we're going to put an X down there. So that's where we are, according to Burchard, and where Ashland was. So other people copied this. Ash had a map on page 9 in his book. This you can see, I'll change it here, but that little box that's over there in the bottom right-hand side. Here's a color version of the map, and I've circled it in green, so it's a little bit easier to see. So again, everything is pushed up into Stewart County, and the only thing that's down in Houston County then would be this one furnace hanging out over here in the corner, which is pretty much where Ashland Furnace was put on this thing from the 1950s. So how did it happen? Burchard. This guy did it. And what he committed was this. Yeah, I know exactly how you feel, right? Now, this is a Latin word. Those of you who know Welsh, my grandfather on my father's side was Welsh, so I can make this joke. A lot of people say about the Welsh language is that it has too many consonants and not enough vowels. So I think we can, if you know Latin, you know what happened to all the vowels, right? We got 4 O's in one word. I mean, what sort of language is that? So those of you who, like I said, if you're the minister of Wales, not the ocean creatures, but the country, you should get in touch with us. We got a way to get your vowels back. So Burchard committed this heinous act. Jim Long knows Latin, so I contacted him to get some information, and he texted me, and I realized I made a mistake here. That doesn't help, but that's how it should probably look in Latin. So his advice, and I'll see if I get this right. That's how it's pronounced. As best I understand what Jim's message said to me. So that's what Burchard committed. It's actually easier for me at least, it's Greek to me. Homoia teleton is what it's actually called. And this is what homoia teleton looks like when it's actually mapped out. It's a term that's used in textual criticism. When you're working with an original text, medieval scribes did this all the time, and apparently also people who worked for the USGS around 1923 committed this sort of thing. You work from an original text, moving down the alphabet in that direction, and your copied text whether you're copying things out by hand, as you're moving back and forth, those are the eye movements as you're jumping back and forth. There may be some slight problems with this, but essentially this is what Homoia teleton is, and it's more easily termed eye skip. So as you are sitting there copying out the materials that you're working from, your eye skips from one place to another. In Greek, the homoio, and in Latin too, like homogenized milk, it means sameness. And the tele here, telu, means like teleological, sort of the end of things. So it's mainly about endings, about the ends of words, the ends of lines, and the sameness. So if you have the same word on this line at the end, and the same word on this line at the end, it's quite easy to misplace and start copying things, and you'll miss chunks of text. Or you might do it in the opposite direction and repeat chunks of text because you've committed eye skip, homoia teleton. And so this is what it looks like, and we're gonna pull up JP Leslie so we can see them both, and we'll redact it so we can just focus on what we want to look at. So Leslie had said Ashland Furnace, 8 miles south by east of the Cumberland Ironworks and 6 miles southwest of Bowling Green. And so that's what Burchard left out. I kept the ofs there, but that's what he left out. So he ends up with 8 miles southeast of Bowling Green. Hopefully this is plausible to you. This is the only way I can figure this out. Everybody else kind of followed this. They didn't go behind Burchard, even though he told us exactly where to go. Of course, the problem will be getting a hold of that text, of Leslie's text from 1859. But that's essentially what happened here. So 8 miles southeast of Bowling Green, when it should have been 8 miles south by east of Cumberland Ironworks. And, back up, 6 miles southwest of Bowling Green. So he made a mistake there. So if we go back to our map, we've still got our X there. And this time we're going to put Leslie up here, and we're going to drop a compass up here on Cumberland Ironworks. You can see Dover Furnace, perhaps just below here. So here's Dover Furnace. This would be modern day Carlisle. Carlisle doesn't exist yet. Cumberland Ironworks is here. This is South Cross Creek. This is the Cumberland River. And if you look at those two places, they come together. If you look at it from like Google Earth, it looks like an arrowhead where you have those two bodies of water coming together. So that's where Cumberland Ironworks was located. So we've dropped our compass there for Cumberland Ironworks. We're going to drop a line, an 8 mile line going south by east, as Leslie had told us to. I'm not going to do this for Cumberland City, but it's pretty much going to put us in the same area. And guess what? Guess what's there? Wilcox Furnace. So Leslie is identifying this for us with two locations, Cumberland Ironworks and Cumberland City. And if we follow his directions in terms of where these things were, he is creating effectively like a phone book. He's collecting all of the information on all the ironworks throughout the United States so that you would be able to contact other people at those ironworks and get information from them. This is why it has postal addresses in there, as well as the owners at the time that the guide was published. And the other kinds of things that he tells us, and this became apparent to me kind of instantaneously if you read Leslie. The reason this is called Wilcox Furnace on this map in 1865, George Wilcox owned the furnace, at least by Leslie's time, by 1858, not only owned it, but he also managed it, right? So he's the owner-manager of Ashland Furnace. And so if we go back to the full description here, like I said, even though Wilcox is from Cumberland County, Tennessee, the furnace itself is in Stewart County, and then contact information, of course, would be for Wilcox elsewhere. But this is the rest of the information that Leslie had provided. And again, here's one of those formatting issues. But George Bateman, he knew that Ashland Furnace was also known as Wilcox. He figured this out, but I don't get the sense that he read Leslie, because if he had, he says, I don't know whether Mr. Wilcox ever actually operated the furnace, but if he had had access to Leslie, he would know exactly that, in fact, that Wilcox had indeed owned it. So that's kind of my case for you, how some of these errors happened and how I tried to track them down, because I didn't want to pass on further errors in writing the book. I wanted to make sure that I got back to figure out, okay, what do I need to separate out? What do I need to sort out here from other things? And so one of my undergraduate advisors, Michael Warren, told me one day in his office, he said, "Ron, error is everywhere." It scared me. I mean, you drive home after a statement like that, you're just worried about all kinds of things, right? But I mean, it was true. I was finding error everywhere, and in my other scholarship as well. And so I want to kind of return back to our image here. Remember, this is Bear Spring Furnace. And I want to call attention to another error. And this is a close-up. So there's the bear on the left. On the adjacent stone to the right, we have the architects who is identified. I walked into about a month or so ago to the archives, and Jim and I were chatting. He says, "Oh, by the way, are you sure it's not Dan Umbenauer who is the architect for Bear Spring Furnace?" I said, "Well, I don't know. I mean, everything I looked up had said Ran Umbenauer. I'd also seen Ron Umbenauer. It's like, who's going to name their son Ron, right? Oh, wait, that's my name, and his name too. And I'd also seen Run Umbenauer, and I knew that both of those are wrong because you can see the A, right? The A is not ambiguous here, so you know that that's not the problem. The biggest problem here might be this little doohickey that's hanging here at the bottom. They're little decorative, they look like teardrops. They're little decorative features. So Jim said, well, go back and look at your images and see what you can make of it. I said, well, I can also see Pan Umbenauer. So I can see Dan, I can see Ran, I can see Pan. So what I was looking at in the process of writing the book, this is the HABS report, the Historic American Building Survey. And so their historical information in part 1 identified him as Ran Umbenauer. The architectural history also identified him as Ran Umbenauer. And this project was done by James Massey, who was the chief of HABS. There were people from Texas A&M, from University of Tennessee, University of Minnesota, Rhode Island School of Design, Ohio State University, Texas A&M again. So this is what they were telling me. This publication from Vanderbilt University Press, 1974, by some other academics. 3 more individuals also gave Ran Umbenauer. Even the Library of Congress, in the card catalogs that they had Ran Umbenauer. So you'll never guess what I put in the book. Ran Umbenauer, right? How would I know? Like I said, I could figure out that Ron and Run were both incorrect. But Ran Umbenauer is apparently incorrect. It's probably Dan Umbenauer. He was an architect. He was a carpenter and architect up in Christian County, Kentucky. So he had designed covered bridges, a church, and there are other structures up there that they have actually identified. So someone had come in, Yvette had come in and told Jim that. He said, you might want to ask him if it's not Dan Umbenauer. So in any case, that was my mistake, my error, trusting some of the sources that I was looking at and finding out that those sources, whatever their credentials, there was a bunch of people with PhDs, I just had one, so I just went along with the crowd, that's my excuse. So back to 2019, just briefly, back to Wood's presentation on Brunzoni Furnace. I mentioned before that I invented this term called fake news to identify some things in research for this project, and I've also actually come up with another term that I'd like to share with you in closing, and it's called bad news. And I've actually got 2 parts of it, and I'm going to leave it up to you. Do you want the bad news or the other bad news?
Bad news.
You want fake news again. You want the bad news. Okay. The bad news for Brunzoni Furnace. This furnace belongs more properly in Houston County. The exact location has not been recorded, but it is possible that it's identical with Ashland Furnace. Similarly, here for Nelda Saunders, located in Houston County, probably the same as Ashland Furnace. You can tell what source Nelda Saunders was using. So this is for Brunzoni Furnace. Well, the problem is, so this is a map that would have shared of the Brunsoni furnace site. I've added a few things on the right-hand side. So there's, this is TVA, right? This is the power plant. This is the Cumberland River up here. Over here on the right is Cumberland Green, now Bowling City. And then on the left, you have Hollister House, circled in orange, and then Buckeye Road. So if that is where Brunsoni Furnace is, and you've probably been working on this since 2019, it is not in Houston County, right? So that's the bad news. The other bad news, I'm not sure Wood excavated Brunsoni Furnace. But that's a story for another day. So I do have quite a few thank yous for today's presentation, and I'll come back to this, but I also am obligated to mention here, there is an auction for a copy of the book, as well as a framed print, an 8x10 print. This is going to be at Pickers on the Trace, so if you're interested in that, I'll leave that up here after we go back to these. And I'll leave this up while if you have questions for me, things that I can answer or clarify, whether you've looked at the book or not, or based on the presentation, anything is fair game. I'll do my best.
Have you reached out to Wood and let them know that they didn't excavate the place?
I think they did pretty much the same thing. The source that they relied on for the most part, and I didn't show it here, was the Cultural Resource Survey that was published back in 1988. Smith, Stripling, and Brannon were the authors of that study. Some historical inaccuracies in there as well, but I don't think that they had good information, because one of the problems with Brunsoni Furnace, and I mentioned this in the book, I do start with Brunsoni Furnace, by the way, and I do mention here that in the part on Van Buren Furnace, that people have often conflated Brunsoni Furnace and Van Buren Furnace, but I don't think that they were one and the same, mainly because I found evidence to indicate that Brunsoni Furnace was dismantled at the end of 1835. When James L. James Sr. bought the properties after the death of Jesse Brunson, he bought a forge. He bought Byron Forge. That property, subsequently, James built a furnace on it, and the evidence seems to be pretty clear to me that that furnace that he built was the Van Buren furnace. So when Ashland Furnace was ultimately built in 1851, after Hollister bought the property in September of 1850, they tore down the Van Buren stack, and that's pretty much what Leslie said. Leslie is reporting information perhaps that he's getting directly from Wilcox. Wilcox got his information from Hollister. Hollister got his information from James, right? James would have gotten any of his information from the widow of Jesse Brunson, right? From perhaps Robert Tompkins, who had married Brunson's widow. So that telephone game probably led to some confusion about what was actually being referred to when it said that the Van Buren stack, the stones of the Van Buren stack were used in that furnace had been built more than 20 years ago by Jesse Brunson. I don't think Jesse Brunson built it. I think the telephone game signals got crossed, the faulty lines of scholarly communication, like I worked on back in 2018, those faulty lines of communication created part of the problem. So what I think they ended up excavating was Van Buren Furnace. When I work on the longer book, as I'm continuing to work on that longer book for the iron industry, I'll go into more detail about it and talk about the evidence. There's even a map at TSLA that shows what appear to be, they're just faint circles in various places, Dixon County, then Stewart County, and I'm pretty sure it shows the location of Brunsoni Furnace. We only have one record from Brunsoni Furnace from before the Civil War, and that's another geologist, state geologist, the first state geologist, Jared Troost. who in 1835 made his report to the General Assembly, and he simply lists it among other ironworks that were in the area. And so that's all we have. We don't have anything else to go on. But as I tried to make the case in the book for Brunsoni Furnace, and Nina Finley actually had made this, I think, pretty clear too, even though I had come at it from a different angle. She had already identified that by 1820 he's got a lot of slaves, and you have to wonder what it is that he's doing with that number of slaves. And it seems to me pretty clear that there's already an ironworks. A later source in the 19th century tells us that Jesse Brunson's father, Dr. Azahel Brunson, is the one who built the furnace. And if that source is true, that he died in like November of 1827, he had to have built the furnace before his death. Just like Thomas Yateman couldn't build a furnace 40 years after his death, Azahel, Dr. Brunson, could not have built the furnace after his death. So we have to push the date back. But there's other evidence too. So it's not just the census records. That's one of the things that Nina Finley had discovered, is that the census information indicates that Jesse Brunson in 1820 already has a very high number of slaves, enough to be able to operate a blast furnace. So that seems to be pretty strong evidence. There's actually even better evidence than that, but I'm going to save that for the book. And it's pretty good evidence. Yeah, Neil?
What happened with these furnaces when during the Civil War when the Union invaded?
The only ones that were still operational were ultimately shut down, but that's pretty limited. All of Cumberland Ironworks was operational, so the rolling mill was operational. There's one on South Cross Creek. Randolph Forge was operational, and there are two furnaces at that time, Dover No. 2 and Bellwood Furnace. So all four of their ironworks were operational. Peytona Furnace was probably operational, at least up to the end of 1861. It was still operational. Whether or not it was still operational by the time that the forces left Fort Henry coming towards Donelson is kind of up in the air, but I don't think it had been fully abandoned. They just may not have been operating at full capacity. Apart from that, almost everything else is either shut down, for sale. It's one of the stories that have been told, and if you go back to Goodspeed's history says pretty much every ironworks in the county shut down because of the Civil War. That's not true. Many of them had shut down well before. Union Furnace, for example, the other one that's here in Houston County, Union Furnace. If you look in Leslie, if you go back to Leslie's text, he's got one, we would call it a font size, but he's got one typeface for furnaces that are operational and a smaller furnace, type size for furnaces that are not operational. And that's where he puts Union Furnace, because he says it was only operational for 6 months in 1854. So that one's out of the equation. Inland between the lakes, other than Peytona, Great Western Furnace shut down in 1856. Iron Mountain shut down in 1855, and Leslie tells us that it shut down, and he's writing in 1858. So if he says something is out and it isn't operational, he says the same thing about Rough and Ready Furnace. If he says it's not operational in 1858, and there's no evidence like tax records, newspaper articles, although there are newspaper articles saying that things are for sale, if there's nothing to substantiate its actual operation, then Leslie's got to be trusted, because you would have to come up with positive evidence, because there's no good evidence to indicate that anything else is operating. And the best, for me at least, some of the best evidence has been tax records. As I mentioned for Stromboli Furnace never got built. They got the land grant, they got a postal route toward it, leaving from Dover, going to New Concord in Kentucky, so it was going to cross the Tennessee River, probably going down Panther Creek. So they got the land grant, they had a post office, but they probably never had the finances to get it off of the ground. When Cumberland Ironworks was for sale in the 1840s, second half of the 1840s, the article said, ironworks, if you're going to get involved in these sort of things, are of vast expense and doubtful profit. So if you don't have the money to make that vast expense up front, you're probably not going to make that profit, because it's going to be a doubtful profit in the long run. The other thing that happens, of course, in the 1850s would be there's a financial crisis in 1857. But like I said, most of these furnaces in the area, in our area, in Stewart and Houston County, and that is where my blinkered focus is, like a horse racing night. I don't know the entirety of the Western Island Rim at all. I just know us, Stewart and Houston. But most of the ironworks are out. They've already shut down for a variety of other reasons. At least, and the terrible thing is that many of them are brand new. There's a huge spike. At best, at almost any given time, there are about 5 blast furnaces in operation. By about 1850, Hollister, when he builds Ashland furnace from Van Buren, there are about 5 furnaces in blast. And then from 53 to 55, it just boom, it's off the chart. Like 10 new ironworks get built, and then they fall right off the chart just as shortly thereafter. So that happens in the first half of the 1850s. The 57 financial crisis just kind of puts the nail in the coffin for many of these sites. But that's kind of what happens. Then, so that's before the Civil War. Then after the Civil War, there are a variety of different reasons. There are other financial crises. There have been other financial crises before 1857. There are various ones afterwards. And so that always has an effect on things. And of course, if you know Goodspeed's history, it mentions for this area that only LaGrange furnace is operational. It doesn't remain that way, but at least by 1885, 86, when it's published, LaGrange furnace is the only one that's operational at that time. Everything else is shut down. And it will eventually shut down within about 7 years. Yeah.
So the slave insurrection, was it Cumberland Ironworks?
For the most part,
For the most part.
yes. For the most part, the slave insurrection in 1856.
Is that the focus of your next book?
Yes.
Right, okay.
You will see, in fact, we went past it. Iris Hopkins McLean had mentioned that for eclipse, that one of the rationales for eclipse going out, let's see if I can get back here to eclipse. This is like doing everything in reverse, so hopefully remember all this. There will be an exam in about 30 minutes. So this is just a refresher. So she says here, oops, that's Leslie. Let's get back to, there she is. So eclipse furnace, a slave uprising was possibly the reason for discontinuing operation here, is what she says there. Again, the problem here is Bouchard, and it's not homoia teleton. Part of the information that he's getting is reported information, and so he never cites what those reports are. He never says who is telling him this information or when they told him the information, and so Iron Mountain Furnace also gets blamed for closing on the slave insurrection, as does Great Western. If you go up and look at the Tennessee Historical Commission's marker up there at Great Western in Land Between the Lakes, it says that ore depletion and a slave insurrection is what shut things down. It was already for sale. The people who were involved in Great Western were financially strapped, and there are plenty of good newspaper articles. But about 2 weeks before any news of the insurrection started, in the 3rd week of November of 1856, before that is when they've already sort of decided that they need either a trustee or a receiver to try to handle their financial problems. Iron Mountain had shut down the year before, so it had absolutely nothing to do with things. The people who were operating Eclipse Furnace by 1857 or so, they're also having financial problems. They were reported to the court system and distrained for failure to pay their taxes. They're actually renting the furnace from Cobb Phillips and Company. So the account here that says that these were mainly shut down because of the slave insurrection. It's mainly Cumberland Ironworks, but there is a newspaper, a letter that's published in a newspaper that claims, this is coming out of Lafayette, they're writing to Hopkinsville, says we're under attack. The slaves have left LaGrange Furnace, Clark Furnace, and Eclipse Furnace, and they're on their way, and they'll likely be here either in the morning or tonight, and we need help ASAP. So that's at the very beginning of December, like this Wednesday, December 3rd. So that is another area of some of the slave movement, enslaved individuals who are rebelling, but I don't think there's any there. It turns out they're completely wrong about that, about the mass movement of slaves coming across the river. That doesn't happen. So it seems to me that there may not be anything to that account.
So the Cumberland Ironworks was on the river in Cumberland, or you said something about Cross Creeks?
Right, so Dover number 2 is on South Cross Creek, about 4 miles from the river.
Okay.
That's where, modern day Carlisle. So if you headed toward Cross Creek's Wildlife Refuge, if you know where the Iron Bridge is on the refuge, you're in the vicinity of the rolling mill. Because the rolling mill is pretty much right at that junction of South Cross Creek and the Cumberland River. Randolph Forge is about 2 miles due south of Dover, so it's in the vicinity, it's close by. So if you're at Carlisle, you can get, from Carlisle, you can get to the Lick Creek area where Randolph Forge was located. And then Bellwood Furnace is across the river, but it's about 4 miles downstream from the rolling mill. But those are all Cumberland Ironworks properties. They all belong to Cumberland Ironworks.
Are there any ruins from any of those locations?
Bellwood has ruins there. Of course, the or the Bear Spring number 2 is later. There are slight ruins in Carlisle, but they're very hard to see. But otherwise, no. And I don't know if anybody's gone out there to try to locate specifically for Cumberland Ironworks. It's all now federal property, and unfortunately, because it's on the wildlife refuge, it's difficult, challenging to get out there when they're closed. You have to have ski connections to be able to get in there, as we did a few years ago, to go to look at Snotty Cemetery and the Rolling Mill Cemetery, which is up on top of that hill on the Cumberland River side. So if you go to that triangular shaped area, it's on the Cumberland River side up on top of the hill. So there is a cemetery up there. That's the Rolling Mill Cemetery. Yes.
So today, there's Eclipse Furnace in Houston County.
Mm-hmm.
There's Ashland Furnace, which is also called Wilcox.
Correct.
There's Union Furnace. Is that all?
Well, if we've had to remove Brunsoni from the equation, but it depends on where Brunsoni was.
Was it on Buckeye Road?
Well, if you trust Wood, it's north of Buckeye Road, so it would not be. But part of the lands for Byron Forge would have been right there on the border, right? Part of its lands were in what became Houston County, but by that point, the forge had shut down as well. So essentially, yeah, so you're looking at Eclipse, you're looking at Ashland / Wilcox, and Union Furnace, and part of the lands from Byron Forge.
Not Phillips.
Phillips is LaGrange. Phillips is one of the owners of LaGrange Furnace. Cobb, Phillips and Company. So that's like Wilcox, that's how Wilcox gets its name. So as you know, we can laugh about those Union men creating this map and getting all the names wrong. Keep in mind that Henry Hollister, we didn't talk a lot about him. Where was Henry Hollister from? Ohio, most recently, but even back behind that, he's even farther north, so he's one of those northerners, right? James L. James from New Jersey, you know, the Stackers from Pennsylvania. I mean, most of these people who are iron people were northerners as well, so let's not make too much fun of them. And the map makers, they're northerners as well. But so most of the people who were involved here were northerners. So no, those would be, that's pretty much it. And as far as I understand, and I mentioned this in the book, what had been the ruins for Union Furnace were bulldozed. So, if that's not true, but that's kind of what was reported. So again, you know, sometimes I have to go with what people report because people will know better. And I understand that it's an area that maybe I don't want to go wandering around there by myself. I would want to take, you know, some friends. Yes.
Just curious, how many of the deeds and other real estate records are in existence from this general time frame?
Well,
If they
there-
survived courthouse fires
Well, thankfully, Stewart County has a huge amount of records, so we can track, and this is, pretty much like with tax lists, with our deed books, we can track pretty much, and I was able to track pretty much every owner. I even left some out just in the interest of space, but we're able to track pretty much all of those deeds, all of those transactions. So Stewart County has a wealth of information. Also for Houston County, of course, because that information goes back to cover this area when it was still part of Stewart County. So those deed records, Jim Long, most of that stuff has also been digitized as well. So a lot of it is available free of access on places like Ancestry. But the Stewart County Archives has quite a bit of information. When I want to go back to the deeds, I usually go to the courthouse to be able to look at the original deeds. So that way I can kind of see some things and get some details on things. But Jim Long has actually transcribed a lot of sort of an abstracts of settlements, wills, and bonds, but we can go look at those books as well. So we have a wealth of information that we can have access to. Fun kinds of things that may not get transcribed. For instance, one of the individuals during the slave insurrection is coming from Kentucky. And if you go to the deed books, you find out that he had owned 2 properties in Dover, 2 town lots. One of the town lots had been given to him by his father because this young man had lost one of his hands at some point in his life. So little itty bitty details like that, can kind of flesh out all kinds of really interesting information, and we have access to that stuff. Melissa, I'm sure, has plenty of access to these things too.
So Stewart County has their records are complete, almost all complete, back to 1803.
Yeah.
And Houston County's records are complete back to the beginning of 1871.
Yeah. So you have them complete, and any gaps where, if you're looking geographically for things that were Houston County, there's a good chance that they're in Stewart County, a very good chance. Some of the court records may be missing, some of the marriage records may be missing, if at all, but for the most part, it's a pretty robust collection.
We're very fortunate
Yeah.
in this area.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seemed like that would be useful to pinpoint the location of some of these things.
Sometimes not. So if you look at some of the deed descriptions, it's next to this tree, and if you go, 48 poles from that tree to this tree, or where these 2 trees are, that was, with a pile of rocks. A lot of that stuff is gone. So it does make it challenging. Cumberland Ironworks, when that property sold multiple times after the Civil War. In about 1906, there was a brochure because they were selling off a lot of their lands. So they actually produced a map in the very back, and I'd scanned that for Jim, so you're able to look at it. But it shows, and all of the parcels are numbered, and so you'd be able to, so we can identify the John Bell property, for instance. But all those parcels are numbered, and we're talking about several thousand acres that are involved in that property just on this side of the Cumberland River. They had already sold the other stuff on the other side of the river by this point. So this is the Cumberland Riverland Company who is selling those parcels. So those types of things we can, and there's even a book that matches it, so we can kind of put that together with other bits of information. But the farther back you go without other maps, without others kind of means of triangulating the information, it makes it difficult to figure out exactly where things are. Jim's pretty good at it.
Especially after when they start selling off property, because they'll go a piece of the whole property, they'll sell off this piece, and then this piece, and then that piece, and then it's difficult to figure out where it is.
Right. And that's one of the weaknesses that I will automatically admit. Lots of people will say, well, who owned my property? Which iron company owned my property? And I was like, I don't know, because I'm not trying to track down the history of several tens of thousands of acres of Stewart and Houston County properties over the course of 100 some odd years. I'm just trying to focus on the iron industry, so a lot of the history that comes afterwards begins to be a little bit problematic for me. I'm not very good on it. And don't see myself becoming very good on it anytime soon. Any other questions? All right, I'll hang up.
This concludes our program, and if you will, look at some of the articles we have on display. Do you have a book?
I do, yeah. Go and get part of this.
And his book is available at Red Shed too.
Oh, that's
As
right.
well, yeah. Oh, and I did want to show you, yeah, if you're interested in this auction, I'll put the slide back up again. It is the original print. Great Western Furnace.
Or is it still active?